Beloved listeners, thank you for being here. Your presence is not a small thing. It means you are searching, wanting, reaching for something better. And that hunger, that quiet fire inside you, is where all real wealth begins. So sit with me for a while, breathe, and allow these words to settle gently into your mind. Before we begin, let me whisper something into your ear, something I learned through many storms, failures, and unexpected victories. Sometimes, destiny waits behind a door that only opens for the patient. Wealth doesn't rush to the loud and eager. It walks slowly toward the one who can stay steady when the world trembles. And that truth, my friends, changed my life forever. I want to tell you a story, actually many stories, but all tied to one seed, simple habits that made me very rich, long before the rest of the world noticed. Let me take you back. There was a time when I was surrounded by people who believed wealth was about luck, shortcuts, timing, and flashy moves. They chased every new whisper in the market, every rumor, every promise of overnight success. And I watched quietly as their lives became a cycle of anxiety and disappointment. But I followed a different path, a quieter path. It didn't begin with millions. It began with a deep, painful realization. Nobody was coming to save me, not the market, not the economy, not the perfect opportunity. Only habits, daily, disciplined, sometimes painfully boring habits. One of the first habits that changed everything was this. I became obsessed with avoiding stupidity before chasing brilliance. That meant reading more, thinking more, asking myself what could go wrong, long before imagining what could go right. While others rushed in, I stepped back, observed, calculated, and waited. I remember a small investment I once made, nothing grand, just a tiny slice of a company most people ignored. People mocked me for it. It's too slow, they said, too boring. They wanted fireworks. I wanted fundamentals. Years passed, quietly, patiently, and then one day, that tiny slice became one of the greatest sources of wealth in my life, not because I was a genius, but because I held on to a habit that most people abandon too early. Patience, that slow, invisible superpower. Another habit that lifted me out of financial struggle was this. I aimed to learn a little more each day, even when it felt useless. There were days when I read books that seemed too complex, too dense. There were nights I sat with my notes exhausted, wondering if any of this knowledge would ever actually matter. But years later, those very lessons turned into clarity. Clarity that built fortune. You see, knowledge compounds just like money. Every page, every conversation, every observation, they quietly stack upon each other until suddenly you see the world differently. You make decisions differently. You begin to feel the direction of opportunity long before others sense it. And then there was the habit I resisted for years, yet it became one of the most powerful, learning to say no. No to bad deals, no to distractions, no to people who drained my energy, no to spending money just to impress others. Saying no sharpened my life. It filtered out the noise, and what remained was focus. Let me share a small memory. I once met a young man who made good money, more than I ever made at his age, but he was always broke, always stressed, always chasing the next raise. I asked him, "Where does your money go?" He laughed and said, "I don't know. It just disappears." But money doesn't disappear. It obeys the habits of its owner. When I finally taught him one simple routine, tracking every dollar, respecting every dollar, his entire financial identity began to shift. Not because he earned more, but because he learned more about himself. And that's where wealth truly begins, inside before outside. Take a moment, let that settle, because the truth is, the world will offer you thousands of strategies, formulas, predictions, and flashy systems. But in the end, only a handful of habits determine whether you rise or remain stuck. And the most important habit of all, the habit of playing the long game. When everyone else is trying to look rich today, you quietly build the foundation that will make you rich tomorrow. When others want excitement, you prefer results. When others worry about the next week, you think in decades. That mindset, that shift, is where serious wealth begins. Let me leave you with this thought before we move to the next part. The habits that made me rich were not extraordinary. They were simple, painfully simple, but I practiced them even when no one was watching, even when it felt like nothing was happening, even when progress was invisible. Little did I know, those invisible steps were leading me to a life I once only dreamed of. There's a strange thing that happens when you begin to practice simple, powerful habits long enough. The world starts to think you're lucky. They don't see the nights you spent thinking, the hours you spent learning, the temptations you turned down, or the little decisions that slowly transformed your destiny. They only see the results, not the quiet discipline that created them. One of the most transformative habits I developed was this. I trained myself to endure boredom. Yes, boredom, because real wealth often grows in silence, not excitement. There was a period in my life when I held investments that barely moved. Friends told me, sell it, it's dead money. They showed me charts of companies that had doubled in a month, coins that skyrocketed overnight, trends that promised instant riches. But I stuck with my slow, steady, dependable assets, month after month, year after year, and then one day those boring assets became the pillars of my fortune. Looking back, I realized something. People underestimate what steady progress can do because they're too addicted to drama. But wealth is not a drama. It's a discipline. Another habit that shaped my financial destiny was this. I learned to let my money work harder than I did. For years I labored, physically, mentally, emotionally. I took on projects that drained me. I said yes to too many things. I tried to earn with muscle instead of mindset. Until one day, exhausted, I asked myself a simple question. Why am I working harder than my money? That was the moment everything shifted. I began directing my energy into understanding assets, real assets, the kind that appreciate while you sleep and stay faithful even when you're tired. Businesses with strong foundations, companies with honest leadership, investments with a margin of safety. The first time I earned money without lifting a finger, it felt like magic. Not because it fell from the sky, but because it came from years of wise habits compounding quietly in the background. And then comes another habit, one that very few people master, emotional discipline. If you want wealth, you must learn to control the mind that controls your money. I've seen intelligent people lose everything because they lacked emotional strength. I've seen average people become financially free because they mastered it. Let me tell you a story. I once knew a man who panicked every time the market dipped even slightly. He would sell at the bottom, buy at the top, and repeat the cycle until his portfolio looked like a battlefield of bad decisions. And every time he would say, I should have stayed calm. I knew better. But knowing better isn't enough. Acting better is what matters. When the world screams, you must stay silent. When fear rises, you must stay grounded. When everyone else rushes to the exit, you walk toward opportunity. This emotional steadiness didn't make me rich overnight, but over decades, it made me unstoppable. And then there is the habit of living below your ego. Not below your means, below your ego. I've seen people destroy their financial potential because they wanted to look rich instead of be rich. But the quiet investor, the humble earner, the person who doesn't need to prove anything, that person is dangerous, powerful, free. Once I refused to buy a luxury car, even when I could easily afford it. People said I was cheap. They didn't understand that every dollar I didn't spend on vanity was a soldier I sent to fight for my future. Money that stays with you works for you. Money that leaves you never comes back. But let me share one more habit, perhaps the most important of all, the habit of seeing opportunity where others see difficulty. In every crisis, I looked for the seed of wealth. In every downturn, I looked for discounted value. In every mistake, I looked for the lesson that would save me millions later. One of my earliest breakthroughs came when my small business nearly collapsed. Instead of giving up, I analyzed everything, the failures, the assumptions, the flaws. I didn't run from the pain. I studied it. That habit, turning pain into wisdom, became one of the greatest engines of my success. Because truthfully, you can survive mistakes, but you cannot survive refusing to learn from them. As we move forward, I want you to breathe deeply and let these words settle into your bones. Because the habits T hat made me rich are not rare. They're available to you. They are small choices repeated with consistency, clarity, and courage. Part 3 will take us deeper into the habits that shape not just your wealth, but your identity, your philosophy, your destiny. There comes a moment in every wealth journey when the numbers stop being the main story and your inner world becomes the true battlefield. This is where the habits that made me rich transformed from practical routines into something deeper, something spiritual, almost philosophical. One of those deeper habits was this. I learned to align my money with my purpose. For years, I chased returns, gains, percentages, the usual metrics. But then something shifted. I realized that money collected without meaning becomes a burden, not a blessing. Wealth without direction feels empty. So I made a quiet decision. Every investment I made had to reflect the future I wanted, not just for myself, but for the people I cared about, for the person I was becoming. This changed everything. It made patience easier. It made errors less painful. It made the journey meaningful instead of mechanical. Let me share a moment that shaped me. There was a time when I was tempted to pour money into a trend that everyone swore would explode. It was exciting, too exciting. The numbers promised riches, but something inside me felt off. It didn't align with who I wanted to be, so I walked away. Months later, it all collapsed. People lost fortunes, and I learned something priceless. A strong inner compass protects you more than any financial strategy ever will. Another habit that carried me through storms was this. I surrounded myself with people who challenged my thinking, not my peace. You see, the world is full of voices, loud ones, fast ones, fearful ones. Most people drown in them. But the few who rise choose their circle with purpose. There was an older friend, quiet, sharp, brutally honest. Every time I brought him an idea, he would ask one question, why do you believe this? Not how much will it make, not when will it grow, just why? Those conversations hardened my mind like steel. They taught me to think slowly in a world that worships speed, to reason deeply in a world addicted to shortcuts. And then there was one more habit, the habit that shaped my entire identity. The habit of embracing long silence before making big decisions. You'd be surprised how much clarity arrives when you pause long enough to hear your own thoughts, long enough to separate impulse from intuition. Whenever I faced a major decision, whether to buy, sell, expand, or walk away, I cultivated stillness. I let the dust in my mind settle. Most people act first and reflect later. The wealthy do the opposite, because money grows in clarity, and clarity grows in silence. Let me tell you a small personal story. Years ago, I was offered a business deal that looked perfect. Golden numbers, perfect timing, strong promises. Everyone around me was excited, but something felt blurry. Not wrong, just unclear. So I waited. And in that waiting, the truth revealed itself. The deal was flawed, dangerously flawed, but hidden beneath layers of polished presentations. That patient silence saved me from disaster. These habits, patience, purpose, emotional discipline, intellectual humility, thoughtful decision-making, didn't just make me wealthy. They made me wiser. They gave me a life of fewer regrets, deeper peace, and abundance that went far beyond money. But before we close this journey, I want to leave you with one truth. Wealth is never an accident. It is the harvest of habits planted in seasons when nobody is applauding you. And now, beloved listeners, if you've stayed with me through all three parts, then you already carry something rare inside you. The willingness to grow, to learn, to change the trajectory of your financial life with quiet strength instead of loud desperation. So, let me end with this. gently but powerfully. Wealth is not built in explosions of luck. It is built in layers, thin, almost invisible layers, the habits you repeat when no one sees you, the choices you make when no one will praise you, the discipline you follow when no one is checking on you. Those simple habits, patience, learning, emotional steadiness, purpose-driven investing, clear thinking, delayed gratification, they don't just make you rich. They sculpt your soul. They shape your character. They guide your destiny. And one day, after years of steady footsteps, you will look around and realize the life you once dreamed of, the wealth you once whispered about, the peace you once prayed for, they have all quietly found their way to you. Not because you were lucky, not because you were chosen, but because you were consistent, faithfully, relentlessly consistent. Remember this, money is a tool. Mindset is the foundation. Character is the compass. And habits are the bridge between who you are and who you are meant to become. As you walk forward from this moment, carry this truth in your heart. You do not need dramatic change. Small, steady changes will transform everything. Your future is not a mystery waiting to be revealed. It is a masterpiece waiting to be built by your hands, your decisions, your inner discipline. May your path be abundant. May your mind be clear. And may you always choose the habits that lead you toward wealth, peace, and purpose.